The visitor at the gate. The sun had already gone down behind the mountains when Do-hwan heard the alarm. It was not the loud screaming alarm that meant an attack. It was the soft one, the one that meant someone was standing at the front gate and waiting to be let in. Do-hwan put down his cup of tea and looked out the window. The outpost was small. It sat on the edge of a wide desert, far from any city. There were only 12 soldiers posted here, and most of them were young. They had never seen real combat. They were here because someone had to be, and nobody important wanted the job. Do-hwan was not a soldier anymore. He had been once, a medic. He had served for 9 years during the war between Earth and the Volari, a species from a star system far beyond human reach. The war had ended 3 years ago with a shaky peace agreement. Nobody trusted anyone. The Volari stayed on their side of the galaxy. Humans stayed on theirs. And outposts like this one existed just in case someone changed their mind. He walked outside. The air was dry and cool. 2 young soldiers stood at the gate with their weapons raised. They looked nervous. Do-hwan could not blame them. Standing on the other side of the gate, bathed in the pale blue light of the security lamps, was a Volari woman. She was tall, taller than any human woman Do-hwan had ever seen. Her skin was a soft silver color, and it seemed to glow faintly in the dark. Her eyes were large and deep purple, and her hair, if it could be called hair, fell in long white strands past her shoulders. She wore a simple dark robe, and she carried no weapons. Her hands were open and raised slightly, showing she meant no harm. Behind her, half hidden behind the folds of her robe, was a small figure, a child. "Hold your fire," Do-hwan said calmly. One of the soldiers, a young man named Tae-sun, looked at him. "Sir, she is Volari. She should not be here. This is a restricted zone." "I can see what she is," Do-hwan said. "And I said hold your fire. She has a child with her." Tae-sun hesitated, but lowered his weapon. The other soldier did the same. Do-hwan walked closer to the gate. He stopped about 2 meters from the woman and looked at her. She looked back at him with those deep eyes, and there was something in them that he did not expect. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was something soft, something tired. "You are far from home," Do-hwan said. The Volari woman nodded slowly. When she spoke, her voice was low and smooth, like water running over stones. She spoke in the common language, the one both species had learned during the peace talks. Her accent was heavy, but her words were clear. "I know this place is not for me," she said. "I know I should not be here, but I did not come to fight. I came because I had no other choice." "Then why did you come?" Do-hwan asked. The woman paused. She looked down at the child behind her and gently placed a hand on the little one's head. The child peeked out from behind the robe. She was small, maybe 5 or 6 years old by human standards. Her skin was the same silver as her mother's, but her eyes were different. They were not purple. They were a warm gold color, bright and round and full of something that looked like hope. The woman looked back at Do-hwan. "Human," she said quietly. "I came here because my daughter wishes to see you." Do-hwan blinked. He looked at the child again. The little girl stared at him with those golden eyes, and she did not look away. There was no fear in her face. There was no confusion. She looked at him as if she had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "Me?" Do-hwan said. "She wants to see me?" "Not you, specifically," the woman said. "She wants to see a human. The human who saved her life." The words hit Do-hwan like a stone dropped into still water. He felt something move deep inside his chest, something he had buried a long time ago. "I do not understand," he said, though something in the back of his mind told him that maybe he did. The woman took a slow breath. 2 years ago, during the last days of the war, a transport vessel carrying Volari civilians was hit by crossfire near the border of this system. The ship crashed on a small moon. Most of the passengers did not survive. My daughter was on that ship. Do-hwan felt his hands go cold. She was pulled from the fire by a human soldier, the woman continued. He carried her out of the wreckage. He held her in his arms until the rescue ships arrived. She was burned, she was afraid, but he did not leave her. He stayed with her the whole time. The little girl stepped out from behind her mother. She looked up at Do-hwan with those golden eyes, and she raised one small hand. She pointed at him, not at the soldiers behind him, not at the outpost, at him. Do-hwan's breath caught in his throat. She remembers his face, the woman said softly. She has drawn it every night since that day. I have spent 2 years searching for him. Every lead brought me closer, and now I am here. The desert was silent. The wind had stopped. Even the young soldiers behind Do-hwan were quiet, watching this moment without understanding it fully. Do-hwan looked at the little girl. He looked at her golden eyes, at the faint scars along her left arm, at the way she held her hand out toward him, as if reaching across a distance much greater than the space between them. And he remembered. He remembered fire. He remembered smoke so thick he could not see. He remembered hearing a sound, a small sound, like a bird crying in the dark. He remembered digging through metal and ash and finding a tiny body curled up beneath a broken seat. He remembered picking her up and holding her against his chest and running. He remembered her fingers gripping his sleeve so tightly that he thought she would never let go. He had never told anyone about that night. He had written no report. He had taken no credit. It was just another moment in a war full of moments, and he had wanted to forget all of them. But she had not forgotten. Do-hwan slowly knelt down so that his face was level with the child's. She did not step back. She did not flinch. She looked at him as if she had found something precious that she had lost. "It is you," the woman whispered. Do-hwan could not speak. His throat was tight. His eyes burned. He just looked at the little girl and nodded once, very slowly. The child smiled. And in that smile, under the cold light of the stars, something in Do-hwan broke open that he thought had been sealed shut forever. The daughter's memory. Do-hwan brought them inside. He did not ask for permission from the base commander because there was no base commander. The outpost was too small and too unimportant for one. He was the most senior person here, and the young soldiers trusted him, even if they did not fully understand what was happening. Tae-sun walked beside him as they crossed the yard. "Sir, are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "If command finds out we let a Valari woman and her child inside—" "Then I will take the blame," Do-hwan said. "Go make some tea. The warm kind, not the military kind." Tae-sun opened his mouth, then closed it again. He nodded and walked toward the kitchen. The outpost was simple. A few small buildings made of steel and concrete. A medical bay that had never been used. A communication room. A shared hall where the soldiers ate their meals. Do-hwan led the woman and her daughter to this hall. He pulled out a chair for the woman, and then a smaller one for the child. The woman sat down slowly. She moved with grace, but also with exhaustion. Do-hwan could see it in the way her shoulders dropped once she was seated, as if she had been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and had only just set it down. The child sat beside her. She had not said a word since arriving. She just looked around the room with her wide, golden eyes, taking everything in. The lights on the ceiling, the metal tables, the faded poster on the wall that someone had pinned up years ago, showing a beach somewhere on Earth. Do-hwan sat across from them. "My name is Yuna," the woman said, "and this is my daughter. Her name is Haeun." Do-hwan nodded. "My name is Do-hwan." Yuna repeated the name softly to herself, as if testing how it felt. Then she reached into her robe and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She placed it on the table and slowly unfolded it. It was a drawing. A child's drawing, made with bright colors on rough paper. It showed a figure, a man. He had dark hair and dark eyes, and he was holding a small silver shape in his arms. Behind them there were orange and red shapes that looked like fire, and above everything, drawn in shaky yellow lines, were stars. Dohan stared at the drawing. His chest tightened. "She drew this," Yuna said. "She draws it every night. Sometimes the colors change. Sometimes the fire is bigger or smaller. But the man is always the same. Dark hair, dark eyes, big hands. She told me he was warm. She said his chest made a sound, a beating sound. She had never heard a heartbeat before yours." Dohan did not know what to say. He looked at the little girl. Heian was watching him carefully. She reached across the table and placed one small finger on the drawing, right on the figure of the man. Then she looked up at him and nodded, as if confirming to herself that yes, this was the same person. "Valari hearts do not beat the same way," Yuna explained. "Ours hum. It is a soft vibration. But a human heart thumps. It is loud, strong. She felt it when you held her. She told me it was the thing that made her stop being afraid." Dohwan swallowed hard. He remembered holding her that night. He remembered how still she had been in his arms, not struggling, not crying, just pressing her face against his chest and listening. He had thought she was in shock. He had not known she was listening to his heart. Taesun came in with tea. He set 3 cups on the table, and 1 small cup for the child. He looked at the drawing, then at Dohwan, and then he left without a word. Yuna wrapped her long fingers around the warm cup. She breathed in the steam, and closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, they were wet. "I was not on the ship when it crashed," she said. "I was on our homeworld. I had sent Heiyun with her father and 20 other families. They were being moved to a safe colony away from the war zone. The transport was supposed to be protected. It was supposed to be safe." She paused. It was not safe. Dohan listened. The ship was hit by crossfire from both sides. Neither human nor Valari took responsibility. It crashed on a small moon called Ran 4. I was told there were no survivors. Her voice cracked, but she steadied herself. "For 3 weeks, I believed my daughter was dead. I buried an empty box in our family garden and placed flowers on it every morning. Then one day, a message came through the refugee channels. A Valari aid worker had found a list of survivors, pulled from the wreckage, by human soldiers. Heiyun's name was on that list." Dohan closed his eyes. "When I found her," Yuna said, "she was in a human medical camp. She had burns on her arms and legs. She had not spoken a single word since the crash. The human doctors did not know what to do with her, but they had treated her wounds and kept her warm. When I walked into the tent, she looked at me and the first thing she said was not my name. She said, 'The warm man. Where is the warm man?'" Dohan pressed his hands flat against the table. He could feel the cold metal under his palms, and he held on to it because he needed something solid. "I did not understand at first," Yuna continued. "She kept talking about a man with a beating heart who had pulled her from the fire. She said he smelled like smoke and salt. She said his hands were rough but gentle. She said he whispered something to her, but she did not understand the words." Dohan remembered. He had whispered to her. He had not even thought about it. He had just said the words that came to him in that moment, the same words his mother used to say to him when he was small and scared. "It is okay. You are safe now. I am here." He had said it in Korean, his mother's language. The child could not have understood, but she had heard the sound. She had felt the meaning. "After we returned home," Yuna said, Heian began to draw. Every night before sleep, she drew the same picture. She asked me to find the man. At first I thought it was a child's fantasy. I thought she would forget, but she did not forget. A year passed, Then too, she still drew the picture. She still asked me every morning, "Did you find him?" Yuna's voice was barely above a whisper now. So I started looking. I searched military records. I bribed information traders. I traveled across neutral zones and through places where Valari are not welcome. I was turned away many times. I was told that no human would want to be found by one of us. But I kept looking, because my daughter asked me to. She looked at Dohwan, and in her deep purple eyes, he saw something that crossed every boundary of species and language and war. He saw a mother. "And now I am here," she said. Haeun reached across the table. Her small silver hand touched Dohwan's rough, scarred fingers. She held on gently, the way a child holds something precious. Dohwan looked down at her hand on his. He felt the warmth of it. He felt the softness, and he felt something he had not felt in years. The realization. Dohwan did not sleep that night. He gave Yuna and Haeun the small room next to the medical bay. It had a bed and a heater, and a window that looked out over the desert. It was not much, but Yuna thanked him as if he had given her a palace. Haeun fell asleep within minutes, curled up against her mother's side, her small silver hand still clutching the drawing she carried everywhere. Dohwan sat alone in the hall. The tea was cold now. The lights were dim. Taesoon had gone to sleep with the others, but Dohwan knew the young man had questions. They all did. He could feel their curiosity pressing against the walls like heat. He stared at the table and let the memories come. He had spent 3 years trying to forget the war. He had buried it deep, under routine and silence and distance. He had taken the posting at this outpost because it was the farthest place from anything that mattered. No cities, no hospitals, no families. Just sand and sky and the slow passing of days that all looked the same. But now the war had come back to him, not with fire and blood, but with a child's drawing and a mother's tired eyes. He remembered the crash on Ran 4. It was near the end of the war, when both sides were exhausted and desperate, and making mistakes. His unit had been stationed on a nearby base, a forward medical post meant to treat wounded soldiers. They had received a distress signal from the moon's surface. A ship had gone down. Unknown origin. Unknown passengers. His commanding officer, a woman named Captain Ji-yoon, had told them not to respond. "It is not our mission," she had said. "We treat our own. Let the Valari handle theirs." But the signal had kept coming. And then another signal came, weaker, a child's voice, crying in a language none of them understood. Dohwan had gone anyway. He had taken a small transport shuttle and flown to the crash site alone. He had not told anyone. He had not filed a report. He had just gone, because the sound of that crying was something he could not ignore. When he arrived, the ship was broken open like an egg. Pieces of metal and glass were scattered across the gray surface of the moon. There were bodies, many of them. Valari civilians, dressed in simple clothing, not soldiers, families, parents and children. People who had been trying to get away from the war, not fight in it. The fire was still burning in some parts of the wreckage. The air was thin but breathable, held in place by a weak emergency dome that had activated when the ship broke apart. Dohwan had put on his breathing mask and gone in. He had searched for survivors for almost an hour. He had found 3 adults alive but badly injured. He had stabilized them as best he could and marked their locations with emergency beacons. Then he had heard the sound again, small and quiet, like a bird trapped behind a wall. He had followed it through twisted metal corridors. He had climbed over broken seats and fallen panels. And in the back of the ship, in a compartment that had somehow stayed mostly intact, he had found her. Haeun. She was curled up under a seat, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her silver skin was covered in ash and blood, and there were burns along her left arm and the side of her face. Her golden eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. She was shaking. Dowan had knelt down beside her. He had spoken to her, but she did not respond. She did not seem to hear him. He had gently placed his hand on her shoulder, and she had flinched, but she did not pull away. He had picked her up. She was so light, so small. Her body trembled against his chest, and he could feel the heat of her burns through his jacket. He had cradled her carefully and started walking back through the wreckage. That was when she had pressed her face against his chest, right over his heart, and she had gone still. Dowan had thought she had passed out. He had checked her pulse, her breathing. She was awake. She was just listening to the sound of his heartbeat. And for some reason he did not fully understand, it had calmed her. He had carried her out of the ship and sat on a rock near the crash site, waiting for the rescue teams. He had held her the entire time. He had not put her down. He had whispered to her in Korean because he did not know what else to say, and the words of his mother had come to him like water rising from a deep well. "It is okay. You are safe now. I am here." The rescue teams had arrived 2 hours later, a mix of human and Volari emergency crews. They had taken the survivors, including the child, and loaded them onto medical transports. A Volari medic had gently taken Haon from Dowan's arms. She had reached back for him. Her small fingers had grabbed at the air, trying to find him again. But the medic had carried her away, and Dowan had let her go. He had flown back to his base and told no one what he had done. Captain Jiun had asked where he had been. He had said he went for a walk. She had not believed him, but she had not pressed the matter. The war ended 2 weeks later. Dowan had never thought about the child again. He had forced himself not to, because if he thought about her, he would have to think about all the others he could not save. The bodies in the wreckage, the parents who had died holding their children, the families that had been torn apart by a war that neither side truly won. It was easier to forget everything than to remember just one thing. But Haon had not forgotten. She had held on to that memory with the same strength she had used to grip his sleeve that night. She had kept it alive inside her for 2 years, feeding it with drawings and questions, and the sound of a heartbeat she had heard only once. Dowan sat in the dim hall and pressed his palms against his eyes. He did not cry. He had stopped crying a long time ago. But something inside him shifted, like a wall cracking from within. Not breaking, not yet, just cracking. He thought about what Yuna had said, that Haon had asked for him every morning, that she had drawn his face every night, that she had never stopped believing that the warm man was real, and that she would find him again. He thought about his own life, the emptiness of it, the outpost, the sand, the tea he drank alone every evening, the silence that he had chosen because he thought silence was the same as peace. It was not. He stood up and walked to the window. The desert stretched out under the stars, endless and dark. Somewhere out there, across the vast emptiness of space, 2 species were still watching each other, with suspicion and fear. The peace was fragile. The trust was thin. The scars of war were deep and slow to heal. But in a small room in this forgotten outpost, a Volari child was sleeping peacefully for the first time in 2 years. And she was sleeping because she had found the man with the beating heart. Dohan placed his hand against the cold glass of the window and felt his own heartbeat in his fingertips. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. He did not know if this was the beginning of something or the end of something. But for the first time in 3 years, he did not want to forget. The morning came slowly, as mornings always did in the desert. The sky turned from black to dark blue to a deep orange that spread across the horizon like spilled paint. The air was still and cold, and the sand glittered in the first light, like it was covered in tiny pieces of broken glass. Do-hwan was already awake. He had not slept. He had spent the night sitting by the window, watching the sky change, thinking about things he had not allowed himself to think about in years. By the time the sun appeared over the mountains, he had made a decision. He did not know if it was the right one, but it felt true, and that was enough. He made tea, the good kind, not the instant packets the military provided. He had a small tin of loose tea that he had brought from Earth, a gift from a friend he no longer spoke to. He brewed it carefully, the way his mother had taught him, and poured it into 4 cups, 3 large, 1 small. Tae-soon was the first to appear, as always. He walked into the hall rubbing his eyes and stopped when he saw the 4 cups of tea on the table. "Is the Valari woman still here?" he asked. "Yes," Do-hwan said, "and her name is Yuna. Her daughter's name is Hae-yoon." Tae-soon nodded slowly. He sat down and picked up one of the cups. He took a sip, and then looked at Do-hwan with careful eyes. "Sir, the other soldiers are talking. They want to know what is going on. Some of them are worried. Not about the woman, about what Command will say if they find out." "Let me worry about Command," Do-hwan said. "Are you going to tell them about why she is here?" Do-hwan thought for a moment. "Not yet. Not until I understand it myself." Tae-soon accepted this and said nothing more. The other soldiers drifted in one by one. They ate their breakfast quietly, stealing glances at the hallway that led to the room where the visitors slept. Do-hwan noticed that one of the younger soldiers, a woman named Boram, had placed a small bundle of wildflowers outside the door. She did not say anything about it, and nobody asked. An hour later, the door opened. Yuna stepped out first. She looked better than the night before. Her silver skin had a faint glow in the morning light, and her eyes were clearer, though still heavy with tiredness. She wore the same dark robe, but she had combed her white hair and tied it back. Hae-yoon followed behind her. The little girl blinked in the light and looked around the hall. When she saw the soldiers sitting at the tables, she stopped. She pressed herself against her mother's leg and went very still. The soldiers stopped eating. The room went quiet. Do-hwan stood up from his chair and walked to the center of the room. He did not rush. He moved slowly and calmly, the way he used to move in the medical tent when a patient was frightened. He stopped a few meters from Han and knelt down, just as he had done at the gate the night before. Han looked at him. There was a moment of silence that felt longer than it was. The kind of silence that holds the weight of everything that has happened and everything that is about to happen. Then Han let go of her mother's leg. She took one small step forward, then another, then another. Her golden eyes were fixed on Do-hwan's face, and in them he could see something that made his chest ache. Recognition. Not the kind that comes from seeing a photograph or hearing a description. The kind that lives in the body. The kind that remembers warmth and sound and touch. She walked up to him and stopped. She was so small. The top of her head barely reached his shoulder, even while he was kneeling. She looked at him for a long time, studying his face. His dark hair, his dark eyes, the lines around his mouth. The scar on his left temple that he had gotten from a piece of falling metal during the war. Then she raised both of her hands and placed them on his chest, right over his heart. Do-hwan held perfectly still. Hae-yoon pressed her palms flat against him. She closed her eyes, and she listened. The room was so quiet that Do-hwan was sure everyone could hear it. The sound of his heart, beating, steady and strong, the way it had beaten that night on Ran 4, when he had carried her through fire and smoke and ruin. Hae-yoon opened her eyes. They were shining. Then she did something that broke every person in that room. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against the back of her own hands, which were still resting on his chest. It was a gentle motion, soft and deliberate. Yuna made a small sound behind her, something between a gasp and a sob. "What is she doing?" Tae-sun whispered from somewhere behind Do-hwan. Yuna answered, her voice trembling. "It is called a suna. Among the Valari, it is the highest gesture of trust. It means she is giving him her fear, all of it. She is saying that she trusts him to hold it for her." The soldiers said nothing. Boram, the one who had left the flowers, turned away and pressed her hand over her mouth. Tae-sun stared at the ground. Another soldier, a quiet man named Unso, set down his cup and folded his hands in his lap, his jaw tight. Do-hwan did not move. He let the child rest against him. He felt her small hands pressing against his heartbeat, felt the weight of her forehead against them, and he did the only thing he could think to do. He placed one hand gently on the back of her head. Her hair was soft, softer than anything he had ever touched. He held her carefully, the way he had held her on that moon, and he whispered the same words he had whispered then. "It is okay. You are safe now. I am here." Haeun did not understand Korean. She never had. But her body understood. She relaxed into him like a knot being untied. And for the first time since she had arrived, she spoke. Her voice was small and clear, like a bell ringing in an empty room. "Warm," she said in the common language. "You are still warm." Do-hwan's vision blurred. He blinked and felt something hot run down his cheek. He had not cried in 3 years. He had told himself that crying was something he had left behind with everything else. But the wall that had cracked the night before finally broke, and the tears came quietly, without sound, the way rain falls on sand. Yuna stepped forward and knelt beside them. She did not touch Do-hwan. She simply placed her hand on her daughter's back and looked at him with those deep purple eyes, and in them he saw gratitude so vast that no word in any language could hold it. "Thank you," she said, "for that night, for this morning, for being the kind of person who runs into fire for a child he does not know." Do-hwan shook his head. "I did not do anything special. Anyone would have done the same." Yuna smiled, and it was the saddest, most beautiful smile he had ever seen. "No," she said, "they would not. That is what makes you human." The soldiers watched in silence. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The morning sun poured in through the windows and lit the room in gold, and for a few minutes the outpost on the edge of the desert was not a forgotten place at the end of the world. A bridge between stars. They stayed for 3 days. Do-hwan had expected problems. He had expected calls from command, angry messages, threats of investigation. But nothing came. Tae-sun had quietly adjusted the outpost logs to show routine activity, and the other soldiers had agreed without being asked. Nobody reported the visitors. Nobody filed a complaint. It was an unspoken agreement that what was happening in this small outpost was more important than regulations. On the first day, Haeun did not leave Do-hwan's side. She followed him everywhere. When he checked the perimeter, she walked beside him with her tiny steps, her silver hand reaching up to hold the edge of his sleeve. When he sat down to eat, she sat next to him and watched him with those golden eyes, as if she was trying to memorize everything about him all over again. She did not speak much. Most of the time, she just pointed at things and looked at Do-hwan, waiting for him to tell her the word. He would say the word in the common language, and she would repeat it carefully, tasting it in her mouth. Then he would say it in Korean, and she would try that too, often getting it wrong in a way that made the soldier smile. "Sky," Do-hwan said, pointing up. "Sky," Haeun repeated. Then she pointed at herself and said, "Haeun sky." "You want to go to the sky?" Do-hwan asked. She shook her head. She pointed at her eyes, then at the sky, then at him. "Haeun sees sky in you." Do-hwan did not know what that meant. but it made something tighten in his chest in a way that was not painful. It was the opposite of pain. It was a feeling he had forgotten the name of. On the second day, Yuna sat with Dohan, while Heian played outside with Boram and Taesun. The young soldiers had taken to the child immediately. Boram had made a small doll out of bandages and tape from the medical bay, and Heian carried it everywhere. Taesun taught her how to stack rocks into towers, and she laughed every time they fell, a bright sound that echoed across the sand like music. Yuna watched her daughter through the window. There was a softness in her face that had not been there when she arrived. "She has not laughed like that since before the crash," Yuna said quietly. Dohan sat beside her. "She is strong." "She is, but strength alone does not heal a child. She needed this. She needed to know that the person who saved her was real, that he existed somewhere in the world, and that he had not forgotten her." Yuna paused. "Even if you had forgotten." Dohan looked at his hands. "I did not forget. I tried to, but I did not." Yuna nodded. "The Valari have a belief. We believe that when someone saves a life, especially the life of a child, a thread is created between them. It cannot be cut. It cannot be broken. It stretches across any distance, across stars, across time. My people call it a Yulson, a life thread." Dohan asked, "And you believe this?" Yuna looked at him. "My daughter crossed half a galaxy because she could feel it pulling her toward you. I think belief is not the right word. I think it is simply true." On the third morning, Yuna told Dohan that they had to leave. She had already risked too much by coming to human territory. If the Valari Council found out she had traveled here, she could face punishment. And Heian needed to return to her schooling and her healers. Dohan understood. He did not argue, but something inside him felt heavy, the same heaviness he had felt the night they took Heian from his arms on Ran 4. He walked with them to the gate. All 12 soldiers stood along the path, not in formation, not in uniform, just standing there, watching. Boram had tears on her face. Taesun stood straight with his hands behind his back, but his eyes were red. Even Onseo, who never showed any emotion, had placed his hand over his heart. Yuna stopped at the gate and turned to face Dohan. She was tall, much taller than him, but when she looked at him, it was not from above. It was from a place of equal respect. "Among my people," she said, "there is a ritual for what you have done. When a stranger saves a child, the mother offers a gift. Not a thing, not an object, a promise." She placed her right hand over her chest, where her heart hummed beneath her silver skin. "I promise you, Dohan, that from this day you are part of our family. Not by blood, not by law, by something deeper, by the thread that connects your heartbeat to my daughter's life. You will never be alone again, even across the stars, even if we never meet again. You are ours, and we are yours." Dohan stood there, in the dry wind under the blue sky of a planet that was his, but had never felt like home. Not happiness exactly, not sadness, something bigger than both. Something that filled the spaces in him that had been empty for so long, he had forgotten they were there. He looked at Heian. The little girl stared up at him, and her golden eyes were filled with something that he finally recognized. It was not just gratitude. It was not just memory. It was love. The simple, unbreakable love of a child who had been saved, and who would carry that saving with her for the rest of her life. Dohan knelt down one last time. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a metal coin, old and worn. It had belonged to his mother. She had given it to him when he was a boy, and told him to keep it for the day when he found something worth giving it to. He had carried it through the entire war, through every battle, every field hospital, every sleepless night. It was the only thing he had left from before. He placed it in Heian's small hand and closed her fingers around it. "When you hold this," he said, You will feel it get warm. That is because it has been close to my heart for a long time. When you miss me, hold it, and remember that somewhere, across all those stars, my heart is still beating. And it beats for you too. Haeun looked at the coin. She pressed it against her chest. Then she looked up at him, and spoke clearly, in the common language, with a voice that was steady and sure. I will come back, she said. I will come back and find you again. Do-hwan smiled. It was the first real smile he had worn in years, and it changed his whole face. I will be here, he said. Yuna took her daughter's hand, and they walked through the gate and out into the desert. The morning light made their silver skin glow, and for a moment they looked like two stars walking across the sand. Do-hwan watched them until they were gone. Then he stood up and turned around. The soldiers were still there. 12 young people standing in the dust of a forgotten outpost at the edge of known space. And every single one of them was looking at him differently than they had 3 days ago. Not with pity, not with curiosity, with something that looked like understanding. Taesoon stepped forward. Sir, what do we do now? Do-hwan looked at the young man. He looked at all of them. These soldiers who were too young to understand the war, but old enough to understand what they had just witnessed. Now, Do-hwan said, we do what humans have always done. We keep going. We keep the lights on. And if someone comes to our gate again, lost, or afraid, or searching for someone they love, we open the door. He walked back into the outpost. The hall was empty. The cups from breakfast were still on the table. The chair where Haeun had sat was pushed slightly away, and on the table in front of it, she had left something behind. A drawing. It was new, made that morning with colors she had borrowed from Borum. It showed the same man as before. Dark hair, dark eyes, big hands. But this time, he was not standing in fire. He was standing under stars. And beside him, holding his hand, was a small silver figure with golden eyes. Above them both, written in shaky, careful letters in the common language, were 4 words. My heart found you. Do-hwan picked up the drawing and held it against his chest. He closed his eyes and felt his heart beating, strong and steady, reaching across the impossible distance between 2 worlds. Outside, the sun was rising. The desert was bright, and somewhere among the stars, a little girl was holding a warm coin and listening.